So let's say Adam and Eve passed the test or whatever, if that's possible, right? I think it's probably a new story that God would have to be telling, but they make robots in the garden. They're unfallen, but they make robots, and they give robots, the opportunity
Mm.
to obey them or obey God, right? Maybe they pass God's command on to the robot and says, do not try and eat from this garden, from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they eat from it. Does the robot enter sin into the world, or is it only through humans? I think this will help us get at whether the image bearer is an ontological thing for us, or whether it's a functional category that robots can also satisfy. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Settecase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today, I have another special guest. I have with me Joshua K. Smith, and he just wrote a book on robot theology, and it's awesome. It's a really good book. I'm really stoked to get into it with him, talk about robot persons, robot rights, artificial intelligence, all that good stuff, and theological implications and applications. So it's going to be amazing. I'm really excited for it. Before we jump into that conversation, I want to thank everyone for making this podcast happen, everyone over on Patreon. If you like this podcast, if it's your top 5, top 10 favorite podcast, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. I would love to do this full time. I would love to be flying out to Josh right now and talking in person and buying robots and all sorts of stuff to use for this episode. But we're not there yet. So if you like this podcast, please become a Patreon patron. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a new feature that is called Super Thanks, and you can look right down there somewhere and find it. It's Super Thanks. If you don't want to become a monthly patron, you can just give to whatever episode you like. If you like a certain argument by Josh or a point that we made in this episode, go ahead and shoot a Super Thanks. That'd be huge. And even furthermore, Josh is a YouTuber himself, and he might come back and revisit the comment section. So be cool in the comments, but leave us a comment. Like, what do you think about this episode? What do you think about the arguments there? Do you think it's plausible? Do you think it's crazy? We want to hear from you guys as well. So without further ado, let's bring Josh in and let's talk about robot theology. Josh, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Hey, man. Thanks, Parker. Glad to be here.
Yeah, someone mentioned your book, and I found you on Twitter and was like, "This guy's awesome. This guy's a bro. This guy is like kindred spirit here, man." So I love the work you're doing. I love all that. But so the book, I don't have a physical copy in my hand yet, but it's called Robot Theology: Old Questions Through New Media.
Yeah.
And man, I'm so glad that you're working on this stuff, because this is stuff that I want to work on as well. How'd you get into thinking about robots and theology?
Oh, it's a long story. The short of it is, in high school, I did some programming. Thought I would kind of end up in that world through Votech. I know schools don't do that as much anymore, but so I spent 2 years in a Votech program working with a car manufacturing plant not too far from here where I live. And it's a Nissan plant. But anyway, they have lots of robots in those plants, obviously. And so we did an after-school program for a year and kind of got my certificate and thought I might do that for a living. Just really enjoyed it. And I've always been fascinated, with computers and stuff, because I didn't have one growing up like some people did, but we're kind of on that the precipice of personal computing. Like, it had been going on for a while, right? Since ARPA and DARPA, but as far as like everybody owning one, that wasn't quite where we were, and we didn't have internet growing up. So it was always fascinating to me, and I've got a little bit of an engineer in me, that spirit to take things apart and kind of see the circuitry underneath and play with it, and I've just never been scared of that. So that's just a little background on me, philosophically, what I'm interested in, and how I like to undo things and redo them.
Yeah.
And then in the military, we worked with some systems that were semi-automated, semi-autonomous, and I don't know if we'll get into that, but
yeah.
So I came back to that in my PhD work to really think about some of these implications, especially about warfare
Hmm.
and automated warfare, autonomous warfare, drones, and even lethal autonomous weapon systems. And so during my doctoral work, I just approached one of my professors one day and said, "Hey, look, this was kind of around the time that AI was kind of revamping back up
Hmm.
and the discussions about it. And then there were guys like Andy Crouch and others who were talking about it in some forms. And I just wanted to look more into it from a philosophical and theological perspective because
Yeah.
there wasn't much out there other than some stuff that had been happening at MIT in the late 90s and stuff like that. There was kind of a surge, but that was still before my time in academics.
Yeah.
So I wanted to revisit all that and just kind of see what was out there. And what I found was like a handful of female scholars who had been writing on this stuff and almost nothing from my theological perspective.
Mm.
And so I approached the professor and he said, "Yes, I would be dying to do some directed reading with you on this." And so I did sex robots and personhood. That was the two topics that I wrote on
Hmm.
for that seminar, and that became later developed into a couple chapters into my dissertation. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And you turned that into a book too. Can you tell the audience about that book?
yeah. So I wanted to make my dissertation available, but if your audience doesn't know, if you publish a dissertation, most of the time, um, it's not accessible like financially to the public.
Right.
Usually they're like $150, or at least like most people that even they go through somebody a publisher that actually publish it. It's usually extremely expensive. So
Right.
I decided to self-publish it just to make it feasible. And I went through a company um, that's owned by Zondervan and Thomas Nelson.
Okay.
So self-published that in 2020, I think 21, something like that, and then started thinking a little bit broader about some of these topics, and that's what led to robot theology as I kind of get more into that community. Um, and so I was kind of accepted in to this philosophical circle
Yeah.
once I put the dissertation out there, and people are like, "Okay, yeah, there's a at least a handful of theologians thinking about this topic. Most of them are outside of the U.S., but anyway, yeah, it was good, and I kind of had some more time to research other scholarship and writers that I was aware of, but not um, as in depth as I wanted to be,
Mm.
kind of like with the literature. And so basically, the second book, which is really short, is just a crash course into all the source material that you should be aware of as either someone who's interested in philosophical theology, theology in general, just interested in sci-fi or whatever it
Yeah.
is. These are the sources that you really need to engage with, and these are some major arguments for the integration of robots into society
Yeah.
and what that looks like. So both of those works are very different, but they're similar in some of their subject matter as far as
Yeah.
like the personhood issue, which I think is to me one of the biggest issues in this discussion, because robots, they everybody has an assumption about them straightforward out of the gate. People will tell you yes or no to questions that they wouldn't otherwise. They just have philosophical assumptions that come to the surface very quickly when you ask a person or a human person, can a robot be human? Yes or no? And people will tell you very quickly yes or no. And then, okay, well, what about a legal person? If they are familiar with that language. Or what about, a moral person or a
Mhm.
patient or an agent? And one side that conversation has gotten a lot of attention, the machines cannot be human type conversation. I understand that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, sorry, I don't want to jump ahead, but
No. No, no worries. Well, yeah. Actually, let me stop you there because I do want to go there. But before that, You did your PhD at Midwestern, and it's a theology PhD.
Mhm.
Why did you go? I'm glad you did this actually, but why did you go theology route instead of philosophy route?
Um, Philosophy just kind of found me. I
Okay.
wasn't looking for it.
Hmm.
Um, so originally my plan was to strictly do theology,
Okay.
general, and biblical theology was my main emphasis, kind of almost halfway through my dissertation.
Wow.
Not dissertation, but through my program.
Okay.
So it's a 52 credit hour program. So it's about 4 or 5 years. Uh, you could do it in 3 years, but so you have about 4 years to kind of get to a topic. And mine really started with, it had some philosophical overlap. So philosophy of mind was always a major emphasis of mine. So I was thinking about memory. So Augustine's, all the way from Augustine forward to even modern conceptions of memory and mind.
Hmm.
And but I wanted to think about it more so from a theological perspective, as far as things like the Lord's Supper and stuff like that, how they um, kind of give us a cognitive jolt to the presence of the dying Christ, and all these other things with, like, these stones that were set up, these boundary stones, how they, when you see them, it's supposed to elicit a feeling, an emotion, a memory, and the kind of ancient concept of the mind. And so I was very interested in stuff like that just out of the gate in the program.
Yeah.
Um, and then my love of sci-fi just kind of
Hmm.
engulfed me halfway through, and I don't know if I just had a mental breakdown or what, but something changed, and I wanted to do more philosophy, and I've always loved it.
Yeah.
And some of my earliest theology professors were philosophers,
Mm.
so maybe that had something to do with it. Um, the guy that really formed me a lot early on in undergrad um, was, he had a philosophy degree from Wales. He had a philosophy degree from NOBTS in New Orleans. He had one from his undergrad was in philosophy, his master's in, like, it's just all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah.
I was just kind of baked into that, and I guess I didn't have a chance. But um, he I think he wanted me to do philosophy. I think that was kind of his urging to me, was don't do a theology degree,
Mm.
and I did, because not because of that, but because how it's connected to ministry,
Yeah.
and so maybe it had more to do with pragmatics, but the love's always been there. Like I think in a lot of ways, going back to the scholastics, they've always been intertwined. You can't really separate philosophy from theology, and vice versa. I don't think you can. Some people do, but
Yeah.
um, that's more of a modern thing. But yeah, I love it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I'm the same way. I was at TED's.
Mm,
And all my papers were like philosophy papers or trying to be philosophy papers.
hmm.
And it was cool because Van Hooser, I did a lot of work under him, and he
Mm,
is really philosophically minded, and
yes.
way more on the continental side. But I found a bunch of analytic stuff in his work too, and he can go both. So it was really fun.
Oh
It's
yeah.
fun. It's fun working with people that can do both, because I think you're
Hmm.
supposed to be able to do both, right? And I think if you're lacking on one of the two poles, like you're going to be oblong, you're going to be weird shaped
Mm,
in your theology and in your philosophy.
yeah.
So I want to jump in. I think it's chapter 1. You talk about humanity's interest in automata, going all the way
Hmm.
back to like Greco-Roman type stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Man, it's tough to like ask you to recount all of that or anything like that. But can you give us like a layout? Like for a lot of the listeners, they're gonna think, well, AI, artificial intelligence type stuff is a modern thing, started in the
Hmm.
'60s or something like that. But you're like, no, not quite. Can you help us out? Like, how far back does this go?
Yeah. I think it goes back to, I think about the tower too, like this quest. I mean, what's the original question is, can we make a machine that thinks like a human?
Mm,
So can we replicate our own internal processes and framing of the world? Can we do that? That's not a new question. That
yeah.
that goes all the way back to, I would even say, like, with the imaging of idols and stuff,
Mm,
is, Adam made Seth in his own image. That is the stepchild verse of in
Hmm.
Genesis 5 about the Imago Dei imagery in that language, but it's the same word in that concept gets it gets muddled real fast, but
Mm.
and I don't think it's supposed to tell us everything. Like I don't think it's but I think it's dealing with creating something that's like me, that is ontologically like me, that is you know, it mirrors my desires, it mirrors my wants, and that is what children in a sense is. But as far as like fashioning a robot with circuits, no, that's not there, right?
Right.
There's not sensors and actuators and all those things. But um, I think even with idols, the false images, I think that is there as well. Is trying to get something, whether it be power, security, crops, whatever it is, that is in the ancient world, very much so,
Yeah.
and trying to control something, and that's what the automaton is. It's something that you can control, overpower, force, whatever you want to fill in the blank with. That's what it's about. And just because they didn't have the certain components to make what we can make today, that to me it's no different. Like it's um, all
Hmm.
this technology that we use today is just recycled, and there's no new materials, right? We just refashion them and recycle them.
Yeah.
We mine the earth for these materials and we reuse them. Now there are some people out there who are a little bit bonkers and think that, you know, love them, God love them, but they think like the Egyptians had cell phone towers and stuff like that, and they
Yeah.
might have, I don't know, but that's not where I'm going.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. uh, but there's a lot of wisdom in these ancient cultures,
Mm.
and they may not understand physiology like we understand, or um, you know, physics in the same way that we understand it now, or atoms or things like that. But the concepts are there. Like
Yeah.
we're building off those fundamental concepts, and I think we just need to appreciate it a little bit more, and then kind of see the progression of thought and where we get to today. I think that matters, and I think even in my present work with technology, it's all a very religious, hope-driven cycle,
Yeah.
and that can be for ruin or for restoration,
Yeah.
and so
Well,
that's very important.
yeah, I grabbed a quote from you along those lines, and you say, "The more I study AI and robots, the more I see it as a litmus test for finding someone's theology, philosophy, and anthropology, even when they claim they are not religious or philosophically inclined."
Hmm.
I thought that's cool, man. I thought it was cool that you went all the way back and made a connection, at least to idols. And you know, there people can quibble and say, well, they if you ask Jordan Peterson, then they didn't really think that the gods were living in the idols. And like, who knows, man? There's a lot of scholars, and getting in the minds of
Hmm.
the ancients and what they thought about the idols is tough. But there's this connection here where you're taking an
Hmm.
inanimate object and trying to make it animate in some sense. And I thought I thought another really fascinating story was, I don't know how to say his last name, but I think it's is it Rabbi
Hmm.
Judah Louv?
Yeah,
Lord?
something like that. I don't know
Okay,
either.
okay, I don't know how to
Let's
pronounce
not.
it.
I won't
Yeah,
butcher it.
yeah, but it's his, the Golem, the
Hmm.
and I think it's Golem or
Hmm.
Gollum. It's not Gollum, that's Lord of the Rings. I think it's Golem,
Yeah.
but that's like you know, a Jewish fable, and it's like
Hmm.
the Golem's gonna come get you, and I knew it that way, but I didn't know about the automata and the word in its mouth. Can you recount that for us?
Yeah. So basically, the story was that he would put a certain word in its mouth, a Hebrew word, and every night he would take it out so that it wouldn't reanimate.
It was for truth, right? It was like the word for truth?
Yeah, yeah, and
Emet?
basically,
Emeth? Emet?
yeah,
Yeah,
yes, and
so good.
so basically, it would protect the Jews or whoever or whatever it would do, right? And it's really hard to find this story
Hmm,
in the source work. Like you have to really do some digging to find it. But I encourage readers to do it. But basically, one night he forgot to take out the letter and or the note and or the word, and it came alive and it wreaks havoc, and so it has to be destroyed basically.
hmm,
And I think that that goes on in other Greco-Roman sources too, like that. You know, the Greeks had their own version of that.
okay.
others. There's a book called God and Robots, if you're interested in the Greco-Roman sources, by Mayor, Mayor, and she does a great job of like really going through the source material in a way that I just didn't have time to.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Golem makes it into her book. I can't recount that. I don't think it does. I think she's more focused on the Greco-Roman source work, especially the Greeks.
Okay.
But yeah, it's
Is that
there.
the proper? Is that the proper? It's Golem. Is that? Did I
That's
sound like an?
that's how I
Okay.
say it. I
Well,
mean,
I
I
say
don't.
Pensées instead of Pensées, so people are used to me mispronouncing stuff.
Oh,
Golem.
I
Okay.
do it all the time. So I'm Southerner, so I'll just blame it on being Southern.
Yeah, that's good. Do you if you can you say Platonist for me?
Platonist?
Oh, you said it right. My southern friends always go Platonism, and
No,
I'm
no.
like, dude, that's weird. Yeah. Well, you got
I,
it. So you got the nice southern accent. I like that.
okay.
Um, yeah. So I mean that part is so interesting. So I recommend I commend the book just for chapter 1 just to see
Oh,
like, hey,
thank you.
this is not it's exactly what your subtitle is, old questions through new media, and you just go through showing how our fascination with automata is an old question and we have new media for it. And so it's cool. It's not like there's nothing new under the sun completely, but it's like, yeah, in different media, there's new media and the same questions. So it's cool to find our humanity and our questions traced back
Yeah.
all the way back to the
Hmm.
ancient world.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to get in on robot persons because I think that man, it does play such a huge role in all of these questions. Like,
Hmm.
can robots be persons? And maybe in chapter 1, you're talking about ontological differences between humans and the rest of creation. And I
Hmm.
think you were saying that the Imago Dei is like a functional role, but maybe I got that wrong.
Yeah. I'm not so ironclad about where I stand on that. Still,
Okay.
I think it's more of the image. Um, so Mark Cortez has. I didn't know this at the time when we met and we talked about it some. But when I was writing, about idolatry
Yeah.
and about imaging, like I've always made that connection, and he does as well. And so I could have brought him in to kind of fill in the blanks a little bit because that's also a theory that he has. And so when I think about because how the word is used so many different times and it's so broad, right? There's like 14 different words for idols
Yeah.
just in the Hebrew. So I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. It's used a lot of different ways. But I think the purpose of the Imago Dei and right and person is not used in like there's no theological category for it.
Hmm.
So it's not like whereas you could look up like human or and say, okay, well, obviously the human is connected to the Imago Dei,
Right.
but not every person in Scripture is connected to that directly. Uh,
Because you got angels and fallen angels and God and
yeah, and
presumably all persons, right? But not
all
all.
things, all things that. So in my definition, and I guess that's where you have to kind of land is you have to say, what's the difference between a human and a person? Are there differences?
Yeah.
Um, and that was kind of the major question of the dissertation is saying yes, there are differences, and I think there are categories for thinking about persons on different levels
Yeah.
because of how they're considered, not just in not just because we're ontologically different, right? Their cat is not the same thing as a human,
Hmm.
not just because there's difference in DNA, but because of how they function in that story. So I guess in a lot of ways, yes, I fall under the functional view,
Okay.
but at the same time, I also see kind of like this quilting together of all the views, right? I don't like just saying I'm one
Yeah.
because that to me is dangerous,
Yeah.
and that kind of.
You open yourself to all the counterexamples and yeah,
Yeah,
for
and I
sure.
don't I don't like the whole point of personhood to me is opening up the moral circle,
Yeah.
not closing it. So that's why I'm cautious to always say, well, I do believe that there's functional aspects to it,
Yeah.
but there's also these other pieces that are really important And as we get into the limit cases, that's where it matters. It matters in the margins
Yeah.
the most, and so I want to be very careful.
Well, so Josh, do you take angels to be persons?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I agree with Thomas there. I
Okay.
agree.
Okay.
Um,
Do
because
you
of the role they play too, right? They're so
as
like if
messengers or
as messengers, as worshipers.
yeah.
Now, I do think there are levels to it. Like I don't think that like a lot of times we just want to lump everything into the humanness box. Like either you're human or not, and humans are exceptional and unique, and they're really in a lot of ways not.
Hmm.
And I think that's where we get into trouble.
Well, so what are some of those ways that the humans are not special, not unique?
Well, again, you could look at how we function. You could look at our roles that we play. Like if you really wanted to tease out how is the human different from the angel,
Hmm.
like what are the boundaries? And you have theologians especially saying that there are sharp ontological boundaries to between a human and a animal and a tree and an angel, and that's why they're not included in the moral circle of uh, moral person. Well,
Yeah.
and and we can make justifications for that, from observation and science and stuff like that, but I don't have that so distinctly
Hmm.
in the biblical witness to say it's so sharp, right, that we can cut a divide.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I couldn't say that.
Okay. Okay. Well, so I mean, I think it's probably yeah, it's after Genesis 3 where God says, well, first he says, here's all the plants and their
Hmm.
fruit, right? And you can eat those. And then he says, here's the animals. And then he goes on to tell the Jews, here's the ones you eat and don't eat. But he never says eat people or eat the
Yeah,
Gentiles, right? Those swine. So I mean, right, implicitly in there, you see like there are like qualitative differences, right? Because
sure.
you can eat
Yeah.
this one, you can't eat that one.
Hmm.
Um, I wonder, do you also go? I believe this is Thomas's case. I know Thomas is hard to interpret, but I think Thomas thought that angels were image bearers of God too. You
Yeah.
know,
Yes,
do
he
you do
did.
you do you follow him there?
I mean, I think so. I
Okay.
mean, it depends how you open up the view of
Yeah.
the Imago Dei, right?
Yeah.
What is it? I think
Yeah.
is a question that we have to ask first. And so, if we can't define it, how can we say that we don't know what it is, but we know what it is not distinctly? And we're going to draw sharp boundaries to say, okay, um, I'm not going to eat chicken anymore because I think that it's a moral person or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not what I believe.
Sure.
But I'm just saying there are people that go there, right? Not from a theological perspective, from a scientific and philosophical perspective. You have
Right.
people, philosophers like Peter Singer and others who I understand there's qualms, but still there are people that move to veganism because these animals feel pain, and so
Sure.
and that's where people start, right? They say, well, the difference for us morally is whether or not this being can feel pain,
Mhm.
suffering, and that's just a philosophical quandary in itself. Is the problem of pain and what it is and how we test and limit and
Yeah.
observe it, right? You can't. So I think for me, it's an issue of caution
Mhm.
in all these things to say, okay, well, I've never seen an angel. Maybe I have.
Yeah.
Perhaps I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
But I've never sat down with one and said, okay, how are we distinct? How are we different?
Yeah.
And what we could say, there are passages Paul talks about humans judging angels in the judgment.
Yeah.
Well, that is not about ontology as much as it's about like we are in a different circumstance than they are. Like we're in a different realm, and so
But
um,
you could
yeah,
also say that we were playing different functional roles if you want to go with
yeah,
the function, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
so and I don't know. I know it's this is all like speculation.
Hmm.
We're gonna answer how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But but yeah, if in scripture we find out that humans are image bearers of God, it's explicit, but it's not as explicit that angels are, right? And then you do
No.
see some subservience or something like that in that where we'll be judging them. Perhaps that's a later state. Maybe that's in our glorified state, or maybe that's not the ontology of it, that we were
Hmm.
made to judge them, but after post lapsarian,
Hmm.
being indwelled by God, maybe that does raise us up higher.
Hmm.
It's tough to say that ontologically, because then whoever has the Holy Spirit is like ontologically superior to humans
Yes.
who don't, and that's crazy. I don't know if that's crazy.
Yeah.
It seems a little crazy, right?
Hmm. I think so.
Um,
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think those are the like trajectories that you fall into, right?
Mm,
If you start making those distinctions, which people do a lot, and I understand that I don't. All of it is speculation, and I don't
sure.
have. But I think there's good grounds for that, and
Totally. We have to do that. It's
yes,
so good. And
yeah,
it like you said about AI and robots, it shows where your philosophy and theology and anthropology is at.
oh
And so I
yeah,
think
absolutely,
going in on the as long as you're not saying here's my new confession and you have to hold to this and this is a no, we're not doing that, but
yeah,
we're wrestling through this to show and think deeper about God and the Bible and his creation. I love it.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that
yeah,
you want to go there.
I do,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of philosophers that scientists, even engineers that are asking these questions.
Yeah.
And I think for me, a lot of the reasons why I remain in this space is because they are wrestling with those questions of anthropology,
Yeah.
not from a theological perspective, but from a philosophical one. And I want to help, and I want to be a part of that conversation with them.
Yeah.
And so they may not be asking questions about angels, but they are asking questions about animals. And
Yeah.
so, that's great. We have lots of um, places to interact and discuss in those
Yeah.
concerns and real concerns, right? Because all of this is kind of summed up in, especially in Genesis 1 through 11, is these issues of ecology and how these systems function together.
Hmm.
And we are the only animal, if you want to put it that way, that depends so desperately on our environment for survival. And so even if you can't get there with the Imago Dei stuff, I think you should be able to get there from a pragmatic perspective that, hey, like I I need to have some boundaries in place so that I don't go extinct, or that we live on, or that we live healthily, or if we are the only indwelling of God and we are exceptional and unique, shouldn't we care deeply about how we use that temple or body um, in this world? Like, shouldn't we think deeply about how we treat animals as
Right.
if they're lesser beings? And
Yeah.
I think that they are, for sure. Um, or robots, or artificial intelligence, or
Yeah.
AI persons, whatever it is. Like, we, even if we are the most unique apex creation, it still doesn't take away um, the fact that we should be concerned about the planet,
Yeah.
its environment, because it doesn't belong to us.
Well, and Josh, that's the huge thing too, right? Like we're the if we are the apex, I think we are, for lots of different reasons, right? Like we're super soft and squishy. You put us in the jungle, but if you give us a spear, now we're back up on top, right? And
Hmm.
but we're supposed to be like these servant leaders, and I know that word is abused so much from the pulpit
Hmm.
and stuff. Servant leadership, right? Again, I work in ministry, so I hear it all the time. But like we were made to exercise dominion, not domination, right? And
Hmm.
like it's not just. Sometimes people will say like the world is our playground. God made it our playground. It's
Mm.
like, yeah, but that doesn't bring in the responsibility as much, right? Like
Yeah.
for sure have fun, but we're also supposed to care for the animals, right? And so
Hmm.
I thought it was interesting too because you brought up some of at least I think in the intro you were talking about and you did in later chapters using robots in a way for human flourishing, right? and
Hmm.
and even thinking the implications of like factory farming and stuff like that and like using robots in an ethical way to factory farm. And it's not we have this like Lord of the Rings hobbit living in a hobbit hole type romanticism a lot, where it's
Hmm.
like I just want the moss covered roof. And I'm with you guys, but I also like the dystopian Blade Runner
Hmm.
type stuff too.
Yes.
There's some kind of holy union between the two. Do you think that we're able to do that this side of the fall? And so that too, that are we able to get to that point, do you think? And then if there was no fall, you think
Mm.
that we would make robots?
It's good questions. You know, things that I've wrestled with extensively in my own mind and heart that, could there be machines in the garden?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I can answer that.
Right, right.
But I like to think that all this stuff, all the things that we create, there's a process that we go through, and it's a deeply philosophical, I say, theological process
Hmm.
that you start with that human's desire for whatever. And a lot of times in our own Christian confession, we leave this part out during the medieval era that there was this desire to bring about utopia through technological advancement.
Yeah.
And if you, to me, it's like so prominent in the literature that if you ignored that, we miss a big part of this question. And a
Huh.
lot of people do. A lot of people don't want to go to Dante and others.
Huh.
And like Dante was the first, not the first, but like he's dealing with cyberspace. That's what he's dealing like not in, you know, that's sci-fi. The Divine Comedy is very much space travel and
Hmm.
all this stuff,
Hmm.
and so it's all remix if you want to call it that. Like we're all remixing this material, and I think it just goes back to our desires as humans
Hmm.
to extend to. That's the question with the serpent and the Genesis narrative. Um, is I don't know if I want to remain under this submission to a God who tells me something, but I don't know for sure.
Right.
That's not necessarily like that wasn't the problem, right? It's how they dealt with that tension, which was defiance, and
Yeah.
that just seems to be a part of our nature in granting us at least some sort of free will. Um, and so, depending on where you are on that scale, but they saw the garden as a prison. They saw Eden as a prison,
That's
and
interesting. I never thought of it like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's to me when they're in that discourse, in that dialogue, I just see Eve and Adam just kind of, why would why would God do this? Why would He put that tree there? And I think about that all the time. Is it just a vehicle um, for them to practice volition, to
Mhm.
to be free agents or whatever? And sure, absolutely. But ultimately, I don't know. Um, but I think there's so much in those narratives that gets to the heart of these questions. Like
Yeah.
even like I just keep coming back to Genesis 1 through 11 as just the prime example of human history in a nutshell.
Hmm.
So I think we're always in this tension between utopia, dystopia, and that's just how it's going to be. And I don't think we'll ever escape that. And so even with the creation of technology, before this podcast, we're dealing with the fallenness of these
Of
perfect,
StreamYard, yeah.
yeah, these perfect implements, quote unquote,
Yeah.
that, and I tell it to my children all the time when we make things and we interact, and like it's supposed to work. All the components are there. All
Yeah.
it's soldered right. It's the code is right. It's not working. Why? Like you don't know,
Yeah.
um, and so I think that'll never go away this side of heaven, and so that's what really drives a lot of my concerns dealing with artificial intelligence and
Mhm.
robots, and people are worried about um, advanced general intelligence. That's not what worries me. What worries me is common sense intelligence and giving a robot full autonomy that thinks like a child or has the you know the ability of a superhuman with the emotional
Hmm.
intelligence of a child.
Yeah.
And that is what concerns me, because all things break, all things lead towards decay. And you see these narratives competing, though. Like there's a narrative that we're going to end up either destroying ourselves, right? So that's the dystopia part. Nick
Yeah.
Bostrom, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk. So we need to create so we can combat those things. Okay, that's one side of the pendulum. The other side is kind of where we started in the medieval era with rethinking about technologies that is going to lead to salvation in utopia.
Yeah.
And I don't think either one of those is absolutely correct. Somewhere in the middle, like maybe I lead more towards uh, Philip K. Dick, or
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
yeah.
That's
And I don't think he got everything right, but man,
no,
like
you didn't.
the
Yeah.
forethought, and
Yeah.
it's just, I'm a huge fan of his work.
It's
And
awesome. I wore the
even
shirt for it. I
yeah,
wore
yeah, me
the
too. I have
yeah.
one too.
Oh, it's
So
awesome, dude.
yeah.
That's so great. It's
Yeah.
also I tattooed on my arm, so I
Oh,
have it
really?
tattooed. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Let me see if I
Okay.
can. There we
Oh,
go.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Oh, okay. So, dude, this is so good. So, the curse. This is why we think of like thinking of like G.K. Beale stuff, and I saw you mention him a few times. I
Hmm.
really like his temple type stuff.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people, a lot of Christians, evangelicals is who I deal with a lot. I am an evangelical in the theological sense. Sorry, folks, but yeah, it doesn't just mean Trump supporter, but a lot of evangelicals think, hey, look, the garden was it. Like, why'd they blow it? But a lot of theologians, and I think like G.K. Beale and talking about temple motifs and biblical theology type stuff, the garden was supposed to be the start. It was the
Mm,
commencement, and we're supposed to make the rest of the earth look like the garden.
yeah.
And so some people will think, well, now we need robots and stuff like that, and the curse of because of the curse of the fall, that God cursed the ground, and now Adam will make bread by the sweat of his brow, and there'll be thorns and thistles when he tries to do stuff. And so now we need technology, and now we need robots. And if you look at it, they didn't make clothes until after they fell and saw that they were naked. So maybe that's the first fashion, right? Or maybe that's the first technology, depending on the perspective you're
Hmm.
pulling from. It could be both, if you're a perspectivalist or something, but
Mm,
um, we didn't need technology until the fall. And I don't know, man. Like we don't see that. It's not like God said that and now you'll have technology because of that. But thinking like if we didn't fall, we wouldn't have this curse. We wouldn't have to make bread by the sweat of our brow. We'd probably still have to make bread unless there was like a bread tree. But all the evangelicals think there'd be a bread tree, dude. Like I always get this. Like
yeah.
there's just going to be, in the new heavens and the new earth, there's just going to be a tree and the fruit tastes like steak and you're just going to
Yeah.
pick it. And it's like,
No.
what a boring existence, though.
Yeah. I think that's that hyper literalism is
Yeah.
kind of the downfall of a lot of evangelical readings of Genesis. In like, I've really struggled with this text a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And one of the best readings that I found helpful was by a Reformed Jew. I mean,
Okay.
like people are like, what? Yes. The guy's name was Herbert Brichto, and he taught at Hebrew Union.
Okay.
So like just one of the best, if you're going to study Old Testament, like the best place to study it. And like his readings on Genesis, E.A. Spicer was his supervisor,
Mm.
chair, whatever. And basically what he does, he takes all of Spicer's notes, like his translation notes, and then gives these beautiful commentaries on the theological narratives of Genesis 1 through basically 11, and some
Okay.
other and 12. And he talks about Abraham too. But like it's just a totally different reading of Genesis that really broadened my perspective of what's happening. And it's not about like finding these literalistic, like, yes, this was a piece of technology there, but that it's really trying to give a theological commentary in my reading of the whole scope of human history,
Hmm.
of like how we go through these phases. If you really think about where we end up in Genesis 11, Tower of Babel and unified language, that could very much be binary, like that. There's so many things we could put into those perspectives that are cyclical, right? That we go through these different phases in
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it wasn't literal either. Like
Sure.
I'm not saying that there wasn't a literal Adam and Eve. I certainly believe that,
Yeah.
but that I don't think that's the main point that it's trying to communicate, that the narrator is trying to tell us
Yeah.
about. And so that's what I'm trying to get at. And when I go there to this book is to try to draw out, what are you trying to tell me, like
Mm.
through God's, theological point. What are you trying to say? Is
Yeah.
is it in pain and suffering, which is a big part of that discourse in chapter 3. Like, there was pain before the fall. Like,
Mm.
it says, I will increase your pain in childbirth. That pain is not just about literally birthing the child, but about watching those children grow up, about watching Cain and Abel, about watching the destruction of humanity come from your womb.
Yeah.
Think about that pain. And that's how we have to think about it. It's not just literally you're going to have pain in childbirth, or literally, Adam, you're going to have to work the ground, but that there's going to be this lifelong struggle between you and this environment that was not there before.
Sure.
So we could have made robots, sure, like it could have been very different. We could have asked God, hey, can you make me like this massive harvester, because I'm trying to, like, I think that would have been fine. Like,
It
yeah,
runs on water or something, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like
Who
it
knows?
just,
Yeah.
like, can you make these animals help me? Like, I mean, that's not what they did.
Mm.
That's not where they go. That's not where they go theologically. They all automatically go to God doesn't want me to have something that He has. Instead, like, any father knows this. Like, it's not that I don't want to give you all my power tools, but
Mhm.
there's a time in which you're ready for the chainsaw, and there's a time when you're not ready.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
and so I think there's a lot of um, naiveness in Adam and Eve. They're
Yeah.
children, they're children,
Yeah.
and instead of asking the Father for implements technology that would help them in this process, they decide to take matters into their own hands. And I think, in a lot of ways, that's a human condition, and our struggle is to use implements, robots, weapons, whatever, to
Yeah.
force our desires upon others, and to traumatize them through that. And so
Yeah.
that's where we are as humans, and we can use them for good. Now, I'm not sure that there are some implements that can be redeemed, but there are many that can be.
That's interesting. Yeah. 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 And you can get into an exegesis of like, or whether it's systematic or biblical or whatever, um, of our works passing through the fire and the gold
Mm,
remaining and the chaff being burned up. And it's like, well, if I make a AI robot, there there's this old like robot. It's like a bunch of gears and stuff, and it's meant to
mhm,
pray. And I think it was made to pray over a sick
yeah,
prince or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
yeah, I've seen
And
it. Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty creepy, but it's also pretty sick that like someone thought of that and that you can still. I think it still does it. I think maybe they refurbished it. I'm not sure if it lasted this whole time, but um, yeah, like if that was a good, I don't think it's actually praying. It's just going through this functional role or whatever. Um, but yeah, like whether that passes through to the new heavens and the new earth. Because again,
Mm.
there's a lot of evangelical theology that thinks it's literally going to burn and everything's going to be, you're going to have a bigger or smaller pile of ashes. And it's like, dude, yeah, maybe not that. But I want to get back to the robots. And maybe drawing out some moral and ontological distinctions between human persons and robots.
Mhm. Yeah.
So going again back to the garden. Actually, this will help real quick. Sorry to do this to you. Do you lean more like Calvinist or Arminian?
Probably more Calvinist.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's nice. Me too. Um,
Mm.
well, so let's say Adam and Eve pass the test or whatever, if that's possible, right? I think it's probably a new story that God would have to be telling, but they make robots in the garden. They're unfallen, but they make robots and they give robots, the opportunity
Mm.
to obey them or obey God, right? Maybe they pass God's command on to the robot and says, do not try and eat from this garden, from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they eat from it. Does the robot enter sin into the world, or is it only through
Hmm.
humans? I think this will help us get at whether like the image bearer is an ontological thing for us, or whether it's a functional category that robots can
Yeah.
also satisfy.
Yeah. So in that case, I think they would be. I think I go back to Adam and Seth. Like it's different, and I know it's distinct, but I still think they fall under that category of inheriting sin through the creation of a sin bearer. And now I think it's different. Like I think it might be more related to how animals are fallen
Mm,
than versus how humans are fallen.
okay.
And I could be wrong. It could be exactly like us, but it just
Mhm.
depends. It just depends on the machine, and there's a lot of nuance you could get into there, depending on what type of system we're talking about. But there are a lot of similarities too, and I think it just depends what we're talking about as far as like what kind of robot. If we're
Yeah.
talking about Tyrell Corporation type robots that
Yeah.
um, there is no obvious distinction between it and myself,
They're
then
they're they're conscious like us. There's something that it's like to be them, right?
yeah, then I think definitely fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I've never really thought about this until thinking about it with you.
Hmm.
Um, that's really fascinating, man. So the fall could have happened even if Adam and Eve didn't sin, but made robots. And so some people will just go, well, that's fine because I don't think AGI, artificial general intelligence, is possible. I don't think there would be something it's like to be a robot. Do you think you got any conjecture on? Do you think that we'll be able to make robots that there's something it's like to be them?
Yeah, for sure. And I think
Whoa,
um, when we think about so if you think about neuroscience and all these things, I don't know how deep down this hole you want to go, but
let's go, man.
um, like a lot of people, a lot of perspectives on this are there's not a very deep metaphysical pool in which they're swimming in,
Hmm.
but I mean, depending on where you fall, whether you're substance dualist or not, or if you're, a strict materialist, which a lot of people in these discussions are
Yeah.
materialist. And so for them, it's really hard to make these distinctions and to give nuance to this conversation because there's no immaterial properties, right? And so
Right. So it's
they
obvious.
think, yeah,
We're
they
just
think,
matter in motion, so
right?
why
We're
not?
just Rodney Brooks, famous roboticist, says that you're just a pile. Oh no, Francis Crick said that you're just a pile of neurons,
Yeah.
and Rodney Brooks said something similar. And they've all dealt with this question. If you just look through the Hans Morvac and Rodney Brooks, and there's just so many of them. You just go through, which I talk more about in my
Yeah.
dissertation, so you can
Okay.
enjoy that. But
Yeah.
all these um, anthropological assumptions about what the human is, what it can be. At first there was this movement where they thought it'll be like a child, you
Hmm.
know, and it'll think like us, and we keep trying to mirror the human mind, but it's completely different. It's
Yeah.
completely different. Like it doesn't think like we do. It doesn't decide like we do, but it does do those things.
Yeah.
And so
That
it can.
that's the distinction between like an isomorph, which is like the same exact neural thing as us,
Hmm.
or like
Yeah,
playing the same functional role.
yeah,
And then there's like machine functionalism and
yeah.
computationalism and stuff like that.
So if we're looking just objectively, like just can it do those things? Yes. But
Play
now,
chess, right?
yeah, like it can do these high cognitive functioning things, but then um, then there's like more like common things that some of these systems can't do, like walk up a flight of stairs or
Open a door, I heard, is really
open a
really
door.
tricky. Yeah.
Yes. And I think some of that has to do with trying to going in the wrong direction with some of this stuff. Like
Okay.
I don't we're trying to mirror it off something we don't understand, like the human mind and
Yeah.
what the soul is. I believe in a soul, the property called the soul,
Yeah.
and um,
Oh, you think the
like
soul's a property?
well, substance. Sorry,
Oh, okay,
substance.
okay. I was like,
Sorry.
oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and a lot of people don't believe that. They believe that we're property things, and I believe that we're a combination of substances. And if you hold that property things view, then yeah, absolutely. But I think there's something more to be said about that. And even in theology, we've kind of moved away from that, and have thinkers like Nancy Murphy and others who, in some ways, are bringing in materialistic perspectives
Hmm.
from um, neuroscience stuff. But then you have people that are like, that's one side. There are neuroscientists who believe in the soul. There
Right.
are,
Right.
so it all gets very messy and convoluted. But yeah, I think, can a robot feel pain? Yeah, yeah.
Whoa.
Like
Okay. Do
if you
you?
think, what is pain?
Yeah. Well, so I think it's. I don't think it's just a neural state, right? I think it's an irreducible qualitative feel.
Mm,
But I am a substance dualist.
okay.
I think I are you a hylomorphist?
Yeah, I mean it's somewhat, yeah. If you
Okay.
follow Aristotle as much as Aquinas does, at some point you are,
Yeah.
on some
I
level,
saw.
right?
I knew that you were a theologian by the way you spelled it because my theologian friends spell
Mm,
morphism, right, with the e,
mhm.
and all
With
my
the E.
philosopher friends do the o. So I was like, oh, wait,
Uh,
so
yeah.
it's funny to see that interplay because you're going from the Greek, um,
Yes.
hule, and so
Mm.
the for whatever reason the philosophers
I've
didn't catch
never I've
that.
never thought about that. Never thought
It's
about
it's
that.
it's a clear distinction where you're like, okay, you're a philosophically minded theologian now because you think it's
Okay.
important to do the E.
Okay.
It's just a funny thing that I've picked up along the way.
That's
Um,
just default. Sorry. I
yeah,
wasn't
no, it's awesome, dude. It's
yeah.
cool. I love that. Um, I think you're probably right in spelling it that way, but whatever. I guess it doesn't matter much. So on a hylomorphist view, um, there's so many views. There's so many like you could go in for thick or thin particularism and all that stuff. But so like, man, help me see how a robot could have pain state. Like, is it that we made a robot in the same structure and the same structure is realized, and so then they
Well,
can play that
it's
functional role.
it would be emulated. So,
Okay.
like, it's meant to give or elicit a response to something that we might think would cause pain. So, like, there's a robot being developed in Japan for those who are going into dentistry, that you can, like, if you hit, so like when you have a root canal or something, and you have a nerve there, and you hit it right, it's going to you're gonna your
Yeah.
whole existence disappears. You're not married, you don't have children, like
Mm,
everything in your world, in your mind, all goes to that pain, all goes
yeah.
to that nerve. And so that's what they're doing. They're emulating that process in the mind. And so, what I guess for me, what is the difference between that and my pain that I feel? Like, if it's a robotic entity or me, like what's the difference? What's the qualitative difference between those two sets of pain?
Well, I would say there's probably not a qualitative feel going on to them, right? Like they're playing that same functional role. They're acting in the same behavior as you, right? But there's something
Ah,
it's like for you to feel that, and I think they're a
mhm.
philosophical zombie. Like
Oh, okay.
because and how I guess how would you ever know? Like now we get back to like the problem of other
Hmm.
minds. Like how do I know that
Yep,
you feel the same pain as me? But like I think you mentioned natural kinds in there as well. Like I think it's reasonable to think you're a natural kind. My theology comes into play here, and this is why I think theology is important for philosophy as well. Like I think you're an
hmm,
image bearer of God. I could be deceived, so I'm not. Maybe I'm a fallibilist about that. You could be a Tyrell robot.
could be.
You could be, and in that case, I'd say you probably not. But because I think functionalism,
We
I don't
could
want to
all be
say
in
it.
a simulation.
Well, that's true too. If that were the case, then you'd have to be able to simulate consciousness. But in the case of that robot, man, it's playing the same functional roles. But why think that it's actually conscious
Yeah. Well, I don't even think you have to have consciousness.
to have pain?
Yeah, I don't think so.
S- So pain is just a functional behavior.
In some interpretations, yes.
Okay, okay, that's interesting.
So pain is mostly a brain state, right? It's certain fibers that fire off when a certain stimulus is, when you're poked, it's not that the nerve or those fibers are conscious. They are just going to respond that way. So whether I'm conscious or not, do I feel pain when I'm unconscious? Am I physically receiving, pain stimulus when I'm unconscious undergoing surgery? Yeah, I think
Well,
so.
you
I
think
just
so?
don't feel it though.
Be who like what doesn't feel it?
Like my mind doesn't know
Yeah.
to interpret those signals
Right.
that I'm
That's why I'm a
feeling it.
dualist. That's why I'm a substance dualist, man. Because like your body might be undergoing those things. I don't know if it does or not. I don't know the empirical data on this. Like, do you start sweating when you're
Mm,
being operated on? I'm not sure.
yeah.
I don't know anything about that. Whether that's
Yeah,
the,
so
I should know that.
yeah, no, that's good. There's a lot to pain, how it can affect both the body and the mind. Like
Yeah.
it's so complex, and I don't have all the answers here.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's why I lean towards caution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is if my wife tells me I have a headache, or she has a headache, not me, but if she says I have a headache, I can't say no, you don't.
Mhm. Right.
Um, and that even with all of our empirical observation, right? We use I think it's called the McGill Pain Questionnaire, and
Is it the 1 to
he
10 or 0 to 10?
kind of, yeah, it's like, describe your pain to me. Is it a burning pain? Is it
Oh,
a
okay.
throbbing pain? So there's different types of pain states, and we have no words for pain. So I think some of the problem is we don't know how to describe pain. Just
Hmm.
historically been a problem, right? Even outside the problem of other minds is that when I feel something, I have literally have no words to give you what it feels like. What does it feel like to have a child? Well, it just hurts a lot. There's
Hmm.
there's no like set, this is exactly what it feels like, right? And
Yeah.
it's different for every person. Some people have a high tolerance for pain. Some people have low tolerance for pain. Why is that? There are many ways it is related to the problem of other minds. What does
Mm.
it feel like to be a bat? That famous
Yeah.
philosophical paper. What does it feel like to be a robot? And I don't think those are questions that we'll ever know, because you're asking for an external observation, or empirical data on something that is internal and immaterial.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it logically
Well,
makes sense to
it,
say. Go ahead.
I think you're right, but the immaterial part is interesting
Mhm.
because if it is immaterial, why think the robot has that? Is it because they have a similar structure on a hylomorphist view? So, like, would the robot have an immaterial mind? Or maybe you don't think that. Like, do you think we have an immaterial mind on your hylomorphist view?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Do you think the robot like has one as well?
I don't think we'll know yet. Like, I don't. I think we'd have to.
Do you think it's possible in principle?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
I do.
okay,
Yeah. Um, so that's maybe where people diverge from me in a lot of ways. That I
sure.
do think it's possible. Um,
But
because I
that's
mean,
a different story. I like that. That's a different story than like the raw materialist that we were talking about earlier, where it's
yeah,
like, no,
yeah,
there's no immaterial because I don't have an immaterial mind. But you're saying, yeah, if you can make it, if the robot is sufficiently structured or mirrors or has the sufficient complexity that the human mind has, then an immaterial mind would emerge or would be
yeah,
constituted by that. Yeah.
yeah. I think
Okay.
so.
That's
Yeah, that's a
fascinating.
that's a nice way to put it. Yeah, and I think in that frame, and it's obvious that a lot of roboticists don't believe that. They don't,
Mhm.
and they would say that the distinctions are between a biological cat and a robotic cat is that there's no immaterial, there's no way for them to feel pain.
Mm.
And I think from a substance dualist view, philosophically, you can't say that. Like that just, I mean, it doesn't, I can't go there. I believe that it's possible.
Mm.
And because of my views about pain and what it is ontologically. And um, so they're not there is what I'm saying. And there's not a lot of metaphysics in their pedigree to kind of help them kind of get there.
Yeah.
And that's understandable.
Right. So let's say we have like an isomorph of a human, but it's a robot. So it has a. Let me see. Maybe isomorph is not the right word, but an analogous a robot that's made analogous to humans. So it does have the same functional parts, a brain,
Mhm.
a neural system sufficiently complex to map onto ours. Does that robot inherit um, the image bearerness from us? Like it's made in our image. Do you think that
Yeah.
that robot is likewise an image bearer of God?
Hmm. Um, I've gone both ways with this one.
Mm,
I've asked the question about the soul. Like, does a robot have a soul? Can it? And
mm,
I think initially my answer was no. That only the human has the capacity for the soul. But
hmm.
I think I disagree with that now. That I think that the robot could inherit the soul, and if God so desired. And I think that's more of a question of for what God would allow versus what we could create.
Okay.
Um, I think I'm not sure we'll see it or that we'll ever know, like in the same way that I don't, like you're saying with the problem of other minds, we don't know for sure. Like there's no empirical evidence to say yes or no. But
Yeah.
I think we'll get to a place where we'll seriously consider like maybe we should consider this as an image bearer because of how maybe not so much on the agency side. We're pretty heavy on the agency side so far, but
Yeah.
on the patiency side,
Yeah.
as far as how that relationships has a bilateral effect to it.
Yeah.
That I can't abuse you, hurt you, traumatize you without also traumatizing myself,
That's
and
a see
also
that's an
yeah,
amazing point. Yeah, because
yeah,
you it's like if you have a Roomba and Lex Friedman did this experiment where he gave Roombas like the ability to say ouch when they run into
hmm,
stuff, and said he had
yeah,
to turn it off because it hurt him and stuff. Whatever, the Roomba is not conscious there for sure, and no
for
matter
sure,
everyone
yeah,
thinks that, right? But it does something to you, and so like it's wrong for you to go and beat that thing and be like, yes, I like it. No, you're corrupting yourself. You're habituating yourself in like a really
mm,
gross way, and
yeah,
you're devolving. Yeah,
yes, yeah,
whether even though it's not a conscious thing that you're doing that to.
yeah, and I think too with the simulation, even if the pain is not real, um, what kind of like dentistry student is just going to be like, I'm going to take my drill and just bear down on that nerve, like it. The more realistic that it is, the more that it encodes in you,
Yeah,
who definitely is a moral agent and patient.
definitely. Yeah,
Don't do that.
yeah,
It's not good. It
yeah,
hurts. It's going to hurt somebody, and I think that's kind of the benefit of some of this
yeah.
is that we can be so numb to some of these things, and especially with violence and like the way that we interact with one another nowadays
Hmm.
and stuff like that. Like we're so numb to some of these things,
Yeah.
and um, I think some of what like Westworld, humans, TV shows, and others are getting at with a lot of this robotic philosophy is that there are consequences to what we create, and
Hmm.
even though we may never have a Dolores Abernathy or whatever, but
Yeah.
we might have something close. At least it may look like that,
Hmm.
and um, it may be abused. And like,
Yeah.
is that right? Is that okay? Just because it's a soulless entity? No, I don't think that it is. Just in the same in light, with animals, it's not okay to do with them whatever we want because it goes back to the cultural mandate. And like you said at the
Yeah.
beginning, it's not about domination. It is about cultivation and flourishing. And
Yeah.
so, I'm supposed to make environments, whether that's in my work as a theologian, philosopher, pastor, husband, father, that cultivate flourishing.
Yeah.
And so, how does that? How do I do that if I'm like, well, let's just make a bunch of slaves and I'll work less and I'll leisure more and all
Mm.
these things, and that's where we're headed. And so, what are the necessary steps that we need to take to avoid those instances? And so, if I need to open up my own consciousness about thinking that these implements might have pain,
Mm,
then we need to think about that. We need to
yeah.
go there. And
Yeah.
then I think it also like it forces you to reconsider too as the moral agent, like who am I that I would make something like this? And we
Yeah.
kind of go back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Victor making that monster and then abandoning the monster and then making a partner and then destroying the partner in front of the monster and then leaving it to isolation. And that's tends to be something we do as humans. Like
Yeah.
and so that's, I think, in some ways where we're headed.
Mm,
Um, and there's just so many great stories about how we don't want to deal with the philosophy of all these things that we're creating, and I think too there's a lot of theology that deals with this. It's just a little bit more subtle than in science fiction,
yeah.
but it's there, and completely forgotten the original question. But
No worries. This is awesome. Well, I think it's a really important point on our own souls, the um, side of things, like because I think I don't think we're gonna have conscious robots, but I think there's some ways you can do it, even from like a substance dualist view,
mm,
like William Hasker's emergent dualism. He
hmm
thinks that like it's the right structure, and it might be committed to like proto panpsychism, whether that's whatever the case. There's other ways. You don't have to be a functionalist to think that robots could have souls.
sure,
There's other views that you can do that. So we do need to think through that stuff, like you're saying. But even on our side of things, like yeah, abusing a sex doll or something, right? Like, holy crap, dude, that's horrible for your soul. Like, I don't think the sex doll is feeling anything. But even using that at all, like it's gross. It messes
hmm
with you as a person. I think even though it's not conscious, like animals, people might say, well, animals are conscious or something. It's like to be a frog. But I think back to the days when we dissected frogs in school, and they
hmm
weren't conscious. They were dead, and they
yeah,
were killed humanely, probably. I hope so. But like some of my friends are crazy, and they're like ripping the frogs apart. And you're
yeah,
like, bro, there's something wrong with you that you're doing that. It's like, well, it doesn't feel pain. Like, well, it doesn't matter, man. It was an animal, and it's
yeah,
gross that you would
yeah,
go there to rip it apart. Like, you're sick, man. There's something wrong with you here.
absolutely,
And that does habituate you in a certain way to be hard towards animals and people. I think I just posted on Facebook a quote I believe I got from your book from Kant that said like
mm,
something like he who is hard towards animals will likewise be hard in his dealings with man.
yeah,
And it's the same thing. It's about your sanctification, and I think that stuff doesn't get talked about in philosophy
mm,
because people think it's a theological thing, right? But that's why we need theologians thinking about this stuff as well.
yeah. And there are more philosophers talking about that. That is a famous quote from Kant in this discussion.
Yeah.
So especially in animal ethics, I think you see that quote a lot.
Okay.
So maybe it's like Christian philosophers and theologians aren't engaging with the animal ethics
Hmm.
literature enough.
Yeah.
Um,
It could be.
there are a few that it's really hard to find though, like people that are evangelical or even remotely conservative theologically to kind of engage with those. Now, William Lane Craig has done some. There's another book called Red in Tooth and Claw
Yeah.
that is especially about the problem of pain and suffering in animals. That's really well done. But it's a small library, so
Yeah.
I think those conversations go together though, especially with the robots.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that because that's kind of the newest one right now is the problem of animal suffering and then you get the young Earth, old Earth debate whether there was death before the fall and stuff like that. And I've seen
Mhm.
that, but connecting that specifically to the robot conversation, I think is really really
It
fascinating. And
is,
then seeing caring for your own soul and the souls of others and not letting people abuse robots because it's bad for you and you're turning people into abusers. People are turning themselves into abusers.
yeah. And the argument is that we wouldn't do that, right? Or that it's another theological assumption about human nature in a lot of these circles that humans are mostly good.
Mm,
And I know it's not popular, but I'm like, no, you're not, and I can show you why you're not. And if I put you in the right circumstance, you'd probably torture somebody. You're like, oh, I would never do those things. There's there's always limit cases to where if the conditions are right, you'll do horrible things to other humans
Hmm.
and not care.
Yeah.
At the moment, you will later, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
And likewise, so for me, it's like, well, I would do that to a robot, but I wouldn't do it to a human.
It's like the whole plot of Westworld, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But what does it say about you that you want to do that? Or,
Right.
and if nothing else, if you don't care about other entities at all, you're forming your own mind, like you
Yeah.
said, and habits of mind that are extremely unhealthy
Yeah.
and will bring to bear in either your marriage or you know especially in your soul. But I mean that
Yeah.
there will be utilities that come out of it that are not good.
Yeah.
So
Well, and this conversation, this is awesome, man. It also connects to porn and
mhm,
objectification and young men like, dude, I used to be addicted to porn. God saved me from that. And it was like, well, it's better this because no one's getting hurt here
mhm.
than than going out and trying to hook up with girls on the weekend or whatever. And all sorts of depravity creeps in there. But it's like, one, it's not just hurting you because you're part of this complex that's
Mhm.
saying we want more. The people are watching this, so now bring in more and hurting all sorts of people that way. But even if that weren't the case somehow, and maybe sex dolls is the example, but it's still hurting me. I'm still becoming that person. My neural circuits are being wired a certain way to look at women a certain way.
Oh yeah, even
I'm
even
being habituated. Yeah.
no, there's even more research lately about how it affects the dark matter in your brain. Like during
Oh, that's
COVID,
interesting.
in March 2020, Pornhub hit its no spoiler, like I mean trigger alert for people.
Yeah.
Like this website hit its like the most views that had ever, like
Okay.
downloads. They made it free for a couple months,
I remember seeing
and
that. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think it was last year or the year before, some scientists, neuroscientists did some studies on this, and they're like, actually, the usage of this is bad.
Hmm.
It does actually hurt your brain,
Yeah.
and here's how. So that data is out there, and
Yeah.
I could find the paper somewhere and send it to you. But not even that, but like I've heard actresses say, former actresses, that well, we wouldn't consider it addictive, or we wouldn't consider it a problem because it's like therapy. And I'm like, well, therapy shouldn't be at the cost of, because there is research out there by a lady who um, leads something called Trafficking Hub,
Hmm.
that um, she has done like helped multiple lawsuits against that website because there was no like vetting process to upload videos.
Yeah, I've heard
And
about
so
this. Yeah.
yes, yeah, like so Visa, MasterCard, you can look at it, they've all like kind of like
Yeah.
pulled.
It's awesome.
So I mean, yeah, you can no longer say it's not hurting anybody because they're
Right.
literally propagating like
Yeah.
more rape and more harm. And so
Well, and so the conversation can move then to sex robots and say, look, there's nothing it's like to be this robot. We haven't, whatever your theory of mind, we haven't made it sufficiently complex or conscious or able to be conscious. So there's nothing it's like to be this robot. So go ahead and take out all your frustrations on this robot. I've
hmm
seen this Whitney Cummings, I think, is the comedian, and she made like a sex
yeah,
doll of herself, right? And
hmm
she had a joke about this a long time ago about how teenage boys should have a sex doll and blah blah blah. And it's a joke, right? I'm not going to take her stuff too seriously here, but that mentality, if you were to use that to say, look, okay, fine, Pornhub's bad because it uses real people, but we're going to use robots, it's still doing the same stuff, and we don't have
yeah,
the data on that yet because it's not widestream, but that's you don't do that to yourself. Like the conversation moves right into robots immediately, and you think maybe it's more humane. And it's like it's not humane to have a
yeah,
society of folks who are habituating themselves towards that action.
yeah. So it's extremely complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a large body of philosophical literature on this topic
Okay.
about. So for I think for the public, when they see this stuff or they see those objects, and for the most part, they are objectified versions of women or
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
Like just exaggerated because that's what the customer requests. But
For sure.
I've been in conferences and listened to some of these creators talk about it, and I think from their perspective, just to play devil's advocate,
Yeah, literally.
they for them they do see it as a therapy outlet,
Hmm.
and there are arguments to be made for those who struggle with pedophilia, and that
Yes.
these
Yeah.
might be a better outlet for somebody whose gray matter lights up when they see a child
Yeah.
versus you know other things. And so I don't I think there are other more ironclad approaches that we could do.
Mm.
There's chemical castration, other things that have been proven to work, but for people that think that's inhumane,
Yeah.
there's the argument that, well, we could use these dolls or
Yeah.
robots for that. And but still I I say back to them, it's like, okay, well, if somebody was racist, there are a lot of racist people, right? I live in Mississippi.
Okay.
Say I give them a person of color robot,
Yeah.
and every day it goes out and beats it and hangs it, and is that okay? No, it's not okay. Why?
Mm.
It doesn't feel anything. And Patrick Lynn actually made that argument. I stole it.
Hmm.
He's a philosopher, but it's a similar thing, right?
Yeah.
It's we wouldn't be okay with that, or so why is it all of a sudden okay for the pedophile to abuse the robot, or
Yeah.
to take out his uh, cognitive failure on the robot? So
Yeah.
there's something to account for there. I understand, like, what if the data comes out and it massively decreases the actual act
Yeah.
of rape? Like, I think that maybe that's a different story.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like I don't like it either way. Like, I don't
No, no, no.
like
And
just
you talk
just
about the
just
results of
making
the
it.
fall,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. But
And then you got to get in the pragmatics of it too, right? Like, so it's practical or it's pragmatic to do this, but is it right?
yeah,
Is it still right to do that? I mean, that's where the
definitely not.
philosopher
Yeah,
comes through, and it's like, now let's,
yeah, yeah.
but we're Americans, and we're our favorite, our famous philosophy is pragmatism,
Mhm. Yeah,
unfortunately, and so we
yeah.
are very pragmatic people,
Oh, even in the church, like, that
for sure,
permeates
for sure,
everything
for
that
sure.
we do, right? And there was a big scandal came out, and I guess unfortunately, we belong to a Southern Baptist church,
Mm,
and all that stuff that's come out, and about child abuse, and it's been very pragmatic. Like, none of this should have been ever justified. But even through the years, I have friends that were men who were abused,
yeah,
and they were like, you can't say anything because you'll lose your ministry if you come out and say that you were abused, because
yeah,
then they'll think that you're a pedophile.
mm,
And it's like, what? Like, you think that's the response that we get
right,
from Jesus, who was like, hey, if you abuse children, it's better to be milestone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea.
right,
But that's where we are, and so I wrestle with that a lot. And we, as a local church, do absolutely nothing for hundreds of thousands of men and women who struggle with childlike attraction.
mm,
And there's different layers, right? There's people who like little kids, and there's people who like teenagers and so forth,
yeah,
and everything in between. So I'm not lumping them all together, but
sure,
philosophically, theologically, there's like little to no literature.
yeah,
So I talk about that in my dissertation as well.
yeah,
Just spoilers, but
yeah. Well, Josh, that's why. So, you mentioned this too. Uh, we need to be thinking about this stuff, and I know you know this, but and a lot of my listeners will know, but the church is usually like 20 years behind,
mhm,
culture, and so I'm just pumped that you're thinking about this stuff, early, right? It's not even really that early, in the game, right? But it's early for us. It's not 20 years late, I guess. So,
I guess.
yeah, so I'm pumped about that, man, and even thinking through like helping people
Mhm,
with malformed desires, and
mhm.
like helping, like wanting to pray and help and wrestle through, and it's awesome, man. I'm glad you're thinking about this stuff. I'm glad you're thinking about robot theology as well, and seeing the implications for all sorts of stuff. I got to have you back on, man. You got to come back on. There's
Okay.
so much more to talk about. We hardly covered this book, and then I'm gonna grab your other one, and we can talk about that one as well. So please come back on.
Oh, absolutely, Parker. Thank you, man. It's been
Definitely.
great.
Yeah. Okay. Before I let you go though, you have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not really active on it. I do post some stuff from the podcast that I work on
Okay.
occasionally. Like it's not a regular thing.
Yeah.
It's called
What
the Dolores Project.
Dolores Project? That's the name
Yeah.
of the podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
Awesome. I'll
named
put a link in the description here.
after Dolores
Oh,
Abernathy.
no
So
way, dude. I just
yeah.
put that together. Holy
Yeah.
cow.
So
That's
I
funny.
talk about this stuff with different roboticists and moral philosophers, and there's a couple theologians even on there. So
It's fantastic.
we talk about all things robot ethics, and so yeah, you can check out some of those episodes if you like. And I'm still early as a podcaster, so
Yeah.
just forgive me for all my many sins of quality and stuff. So, but yeah,
No worries.
and then I'm writing several books, chapters, and still thinking about this stuff. Working on a project now about violence and technology, and
Okay.
how it's all driven by this religious desire to overcome the fall,
Mm,
kind of, and just kind of tracing out this literature, which is, I mean, is so religious, all this stuff,
yeah.
and yeah, and then some other more practical things coming up, but
That's
yeah,
awesome.
lots. My world
That's
is
awesome.
robots, basically. Yeah.
Seriously, I wanted to get into autonomous warfare, but we won't have time right now. But we got to talk about that, and we could go
Next, yeah,
over.
we can talk about that next.
Yeah, Philip K. Dick's the third variety. He's got this awesome little short piece about autonomous weapons, and it's crazy and terrifying. I had nightmares
Okay.
from it, but it's so good. Awesome, man. All right, so I got to let you go here, but this has been Parker's Pensées. You can find the links to the description in the description to all Josh's stuff. You can find him on Twitter as well. That's gonna have to do it for now, folks. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.